Hello there, I'm Big Alias. How's it going with you? It's cold. I'm freezing. It is so cold right now. I have a few sips of wine and we're going to have a chat. Something I wanted to talk about in this video. It just sort of came across me and I wanted to have a chat about it. It's actually something that I've spoken about before, and that's Cormac McCarthy and No Country for Old Men. And it feels as though like I'm rehashing these ideas, but actually 2 years later, I think it's about 2 years later, from when I initially posted this notion, I want to sort of rehash these ideas and come to you with a different perspective. I think there's a different perspective to have based off of what the life that you've lived. So, I've said this before on this channel, but my favorite book of all time is No Country for Old Men, and I like to discuss that. I think there's no bigger window into someone's soul than their favorite book, favorite show, film, album. It's all very passive. It's it's experiences that you just have that just sort of evolve themselves around you. Whereas, with a book, you create yourself as that character. You sort of input yourself into, and you become introspective in some sort of transformation to the character. I think with a book, it's unlike any other experience, and you really do become the character that you read. And with No Country for Old Men, it speaks to me in such a loud way, and I don't think I spoke about this in the previous video, why this is my favorite book. If you've seen any of my videos on here before, you'll know that I'm a very cynical guy. And I think that, Cormac speaks to me. When I say favorite book, I also mean favorite author, which I think they kind of go hand in hand. Like, if you're going to say something like, Misery or Akujo or, I think Pet Sematary, books like that. Stephen King is going to be your favorite author, stuff like that. And I think, with Cormac, he's my favorite author. And the reason that he's my favorite author is because his books are just so about the human experience. Let's just put it like that. But when I say about the human experience, you have to know who I am to know what I mean by that. What I mean by that is that the human experience is not as glorified as other authors would portray it to be. So the human experience is surviving, and I think that Cormac, I know that he had some issues. He had some, he was an author, he was a brilliant author. In my opinion, the greatest author of all time. But a brilliant author who obviously struggled with some issues. But he really understood that the human condition is the one to survive. And that the condition itself is one's need to survive in a universe that has already made its mind up for you. And that's why I connect with Cormac in such a heavy way, because my views on life and my opinion on life was married up to Cormac before I even experienced his writing. I only encountered his writing 6 or 7 years ago, something like that, but I connected with it in such a strong and intense way because that's how I felt to begin with. And I think a lot of people do that. They connect with literature in a way that, like, if you're very whimsical and you have a lot of sort of optimistic and broad spectrum ideas of what a human is and what people can do, and the very extremes of human nature, then maybe you'll connect with like J.K. Rowling's work, despite her being a TERF. Like, you'll experience like these beautiful whimsical stories, and you go, oh my god, like Harry Potter is amazing, stuff like that. But with me, I'm such a cynical guy, and I'm someone who sees the world as like this challenge with which you have to fit with them, but that it was already determined itself and already knows what it's going to do. Human nature, well, not even human nature, sorry, Mother Nature, like the way in which the Earth has like a gravitational force and a mass, and it moves and it ebbs and it flows and all of this, like, it's already predetermined. It's already going to happen. The gravitational force of the Earth is what it is. It will spin as it does. The axis will be on the degree that it already has been on, and that's not going to change. If I make £1 million, or if I drive a Lamborghini versus a Citroen, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what anyone's doing on this earth. It is predetermined. What happens will happen, and I think one way to sort of ascertain that notion is to look at the time, the sort of timescape of the universe. We'll look at billions of years. and if a gravitational force, which it wouldn't, were to change or flip or just tilt in any way, shape or form, we're talking about like millions of years, hundreds of if not billions of years for something like that to happen. So when we look at the grand scheme of things, I just relate to the notion of things already being predetermined, and sort of that is how it is when it comes to something like the Earth. And so that's why I relate to Cormac McCarthy in such an intense way. I didn't expect this to be such a long-winded explanation, but that is how I feel about the universe and how I feel about Cormac. I just think his work is so beautiful, and particularly, I mean, I love The Crossing, I love The Road, and All the Pretty Horses. All the Pretty Horses is such a gorgeous story about two, guys just like owning a ranch. But that's the thing about Cormac's work, is that he takes the micro and turns it into a macro and makes the micro itself feel so inconsequential and unimportant in terms of the the macro scale. He did all of this rather. That I just think it's brilliant work, and it's almost required. Like I think if you're going to be a thinking mind and you're going to be someone who thinks about things, then Cormac is absolutely required. But in terms of this notion that I explored previously of like the cyclical nature of fear and living in this world that you think has become worse and more dangerous, and sort of you're incapable of living within the boundaries of, I'm not sure I feel like that way anymore. I remember I looked at my, I visit my parents quite often. I try to, as much as possible, and I looked at my dad and I said, look, tell me, you are older than me, you're decades older than me, is the world worse, or am I just getting older? And that's the whole point, by the way. No Country for Old Men is the world worse, or am I becoming older? He looked at me and he said, no, Alan, the world is becoming worse. And I still don't know. Through someone who has experienced decades of life, over half a century of life, I still don't know. If he's correct. And I still don't know. Because it's difficult to separate yourself from the objective. And am I living in a world that is objectively worse? In my opinion, yes. Inflation is higher than it's ever been, and people are not happy. People are rioting in the streets. Every time something different happens, there is a chain reaction that is far worse than the thing that has happened. Quite frankly, it leads to a bigger amalgamation of something that doesn't really, that is far worse than it ever was. And watching that, it's hard not to look at it and sort of go like, oh yeah, definitely things are objectively worse. But man, this guy has lived through over half a century of life. He's seen so much. He saw the punks, he saw the indie kids, he saw the hipsters, he saw it all. And he said that this was the worst. And it's hard not to trust the word of a man like that. But at the same time, when Cormac was there, when Cormac said all this, Cormac was almost experienced an entire century and told me in the early 2000s that my issue is that I have become older, and not that the world has become older, but that I have, and I've become more cynical than I ever was. And I'm not sure how to read that, because in my opinion, like I said, objectively speaking, it feels as though it's hard not to tell yourself that things have become worse. There are a lot of issues currently going on right now, but am I just more incredulous? And I don't know how to answer that question, and I would love to know your input down below. If you don't know, absolutely go ahead and read some Cormac McCarthy. There's plenty to open up here. I also want to talk about like Neil Gaiman and what have you, but Cormac's my goat. Absolutely read his books if you feel the same way that I do, or you enjoy these commentaries in any way, shape or form. But I really want to know whether people feel as though things have got worse, or they're just becoming older and cynical and credulous, or whether all of these countries being run by these old cynical men is an issue and has led to a broader sort of spreading out of this opinion. I think it'll be interesting to explore something like that. But until then, that's the end of this commentary, and I will see everyone later.
The PlayStation is only $149, and you can also get leading titles.